I'm rolling, yes.
I am the Ascended Master Jesus, and it is my intent with this discourse to give you some teachings that will not apply to all people, certainly not all people who in a wider sense might find this teaching, but it applies to many of you, and I advise you not to sit there and judge with the outer mind whether it applies to you or not, for you cannot know that with the outer mind, and you cannot necessarily know it at your present level of awareness, but you will know it when you rise to the higher levels of your divine plan and have a more clear vision of these higher levels. Now, my beloved, if you look at planet Earth today, you can, as we have talked about earlier, see that there are many different groupings of people who are in many different levels of consciousness, have many different belief systems, many worldviews. However, what I wish to bring to your attention here is that there is a segment of the spiritual field, the New Age, mystical, esoteric, open-minded people who have come to believe that either there is no darkness, no dark forces, or that you as a spiritual person should not put your attention upon them, because by doing so you give them power. Now, naturally, we have given you through this dispensation many teachings on the fallen beings. We have given the teachings on the concept of avatars and how you come to Earth and you are exposed to the trauma by the fallen beings. Is it then truth or reality that what these people say, that either dark forces don't exist or that you should not put your attention upon them? Well, this is a delicate matter in the sense that there are a few people on Earth for whom it is not necessary to put their attention on dark forces. But actually, anyone who is an avatar, you have to put your attention on learning about fallen beings and what they do, because they were the ones who attacked you when you came to this mission. They were the ones who caused you to create your primal self. And as long as you are not willing to look at the existence of dark forces and how they could influence you in the past, well, you cannot free yourself from the primal self. And if you do not free yourself from the primal self, then you cannot fulfill the highest potential for your divine plan. So the sad reality is that there are actually tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people in the New Age field who have a high potential in their divine plans. But as long as they maintain this attitude that they should ignore dark forces, not put their attention upon it, they have cut themselves off from fulfilling the higher potential of their divine plan. They have gone to a certain level, and they might feel very comfortable there, partly because they feel there are no dark forces attacking me. And of course, the dark forces are not attacking them because they are not a threat to the dark forces. So, what is a threat to the dark forces? What is it they desperately want to avoid? Well, they want to avoid that a human being in physical embodiment rises to the level where he or she can consciously acknowledge that you have a level of Christhood, and because of that, you have the opportunity and the authority to challenge the fallen beings and their presence on Earth. This is what they are mortally afraid of, because they know that once you step up to that level, it is impossible for them to stop you. And they know that if they try to stop you, it will bring about their judgment. And so, what I am leading you towards is the realization that for many of you, and some of those who will find this teaching in a broader area, it is the higher aspects of your divine plan that you bring the judgment of Christ upon the fallen beings and their consciousness. And so when you look at my life, you see how I would confront the fallen beings, and you may look at yourselves today and then consider what this means for you today. And it doesn't mean the same necessarily as what you saw in my life. But it does mean that you need to come to a point where you acknowledge that this is part of your divine plan. You know this from within, not because I'm telling you, not because you're reading this dictation. I don't want you to read this and then decide with the outer mind that I'm going to go on a crusade and expose the fallen beings and challenge them. It has to come from within, and it will only come, my beloved, when you have resolved the birth trauma that the fallen beings use to paralyze you and prevent you from being who you are on this planet. You understand, my beloved, that there is a certain mechanism that can come into play even when you have the teachings that you have had up until the teachings on the birth trauma. It is almost as if, as a spiritual student, you can go into a state of mind where, as we have said before, you think it is a matter of getting more and more understanding about the spiritual path, even more and more understanding about the ego, about psychology, about healing your psychology. And so it is almost as if you create a self that thinks you are making progress. But if you look carefully at this self, it also thinks that the ultimate breakthrough is out there in the future. Someday it will happen if you continue to do what you are doing now. But as my beloved brother Saint Germain said, there's a time for evolutionary progress, and there are certain times where you need to make a revolutionary shift in consciousness. And a revolutionary shift you need to make if you want to step up to a higher level is to recognize that what defines you as a being and embodiment on earth is your birth trauma. It has defined you from your first embodiment. And all of these other things that you might have done, various therapies, studying various teachings, practicing spiritual tools, they have all been helpful in bringing an evolutionary change. And you have progressed by doing it. But they will actually not truly shift your consciousness because they are not touching the birth trauma. It is as if they are circling around it, but not getting to it. And that is why you need to make the shift and realize that there comes that point where you know from within, because you recognize the truth in what we are saying, that the next step for you is to look at this birth trauma directly. You cannot walk around it. And you cannot skirt the issue. You cannot focus on other things. You cannot think it just happens one day. If you keep doing invocations and studying the teachings, poof, it is going to happen. It is not going to happen. You may need to make a conscious decision to confront this, to go right into it, and to discover how the fallen beings paralyzed you. The book on my lives describes one way, but naturally the fallen beings have various ways of doing this. Some of you have been given your birth trauma by being lured by your good intentions, by being lied to, and then by being betrayed. And there are other scenarios that come into play. And so, until you discover that birth trauma, you cannot actually manifest and accept your Christhood. You cannot accept yourself as the Christ on earth. Why is that? Because, my beloved, what was it, in essence, that the fallen beings did when they exposed you to the birth trauma? Well, they created a division in your being, in your four lower bodies. And the core of this division is not actually fear, even though you might think it is. But the core of the division is doubt. The most insidious enemy on the spiritual path is actually doubt. So, you come here as an avatar with the best of intentions, and then the fallen beings expose you to this trauma, and suddenly you begin to doubt. Should I have come here? Do I have a right to come here? Am I welcome here? Can I ever be myself and express myself on this planet? Should I change myself into somebody else so that people can accept me? All of these various doubts, an almost infinite variety of doubts. And you see this in yourselves in many cases where you can be very quick to doubt yourself. And there is a good side of this in the sense that you are open-minded. And you are open to seeing things in yourself and changing yourself. And this is a positive. It is what has helped you grow on the path. But you must recognize that there is also a potential danger with this. Because you see some people on the earth who are completely closed-minded. They are absolutely convinced that they are right. And they seemingly, at least on a surface level, have no doubt about being right. Of course, at a very deeper level, all people have doubt, various doubts. But many people have managed to put on a facade, a persona, where they project that they are right and they know they are right. And they seemingly have none of the doubts. Some of you know these people like this, and some of you have sat there and wondered, how can they be so sure about themselves? Why am I doubting myself so much? Because many of you will recognize that you have this tendency, especially when you are confronted with these very dominant, very strong personalities, as they call it, to doubt yourself. Oh, maybe they're right. And then suddenly you go into a loop in the mind. And this loop is created by the linear mind, the analytical mind. Because what can the analytical mind do? It can always come up with arguments for or against any viewpoint, any topic. It can argue from both sides of the case. And so, when you have this tendency to go into doubt, then your analytical mind can always present an argument for why you might actually be wrong, or maybe you shouldn't speak up, maybe you shouldn't challenge that person, maybe that person is right after all, maybe they just have a right to be the way they are, and maybe you should just ignore it and submit to them, or go away and leave them where they are without challenging them. So you understand what I said earlier. The greatest fear of the fallen beings is to have the living Christ in embodiment who challenges them. So what have they done? They have attempted to, with every avatar that came to this earth, insert an element of doubt so that you do not dare to challenge them. The absolutely last thing they want is for you to reach a certain level of Christhood and then challenge them. And they have done everything possible to prevent this, and their main tool is this element of doubt they have inserted into you. And it is only when you look at the birth trauma consciously that you will discover what it is you doubt about your right to be here, your right to be the living Christ in embodiment, your right to challenge the fallen beings, your right to express who you are, your higher spiritual identity. And of course, only when you look at the doubt will you be able to see that the fallen beings used a specific viewpoint a specific belief to insert this doubt, but that belief is an illusion. Why is it an illusion? Because it is dualistic. And that means that when you look at this belief in isolation, it might seem valid. But when you step back and realize that in duality, every single viewpoint has an opposite polarity, then you can see the opposite polarity of the viewpoint that caused your doubt. And then you can see that you can also come up with valid viewpoints to support that polarity. And that is when you can see that none of them are the ultimate reality. You understand, my beloved? The fallen beings can only operate with duality. Duality is always a polarity. So how do the fallen beings take on any appearance of authority? How do they manage to make people believe that here's one viewpoint, a dualistic viewpoint, that is an absolute truth? Well, they can only do this by ignoring the opposite dualistic polarity, by downplaying it, by hiding it, by making people ignore it or doubt it. And therefore they elevate the one polarity as the absolute truth. Sometimes they also present the opposite polarity as evil, and that is, of course, you can see this all over the world, how there's raised up truth and error, truth and a lie, capitalism, communism, Christianity, all other religions, so forth and so on. So many of these dualistic polarities where one is wholly good and the other is wholly bad. And so when you see this at the personal level, in your own birth trauma, how you took in a certain belief that caused you to doubt your right to be here, and then you see that it has an opposite polarity, and you could argue forever for or against these two polarities, and you can step back and say, enough with the argumentation, I'm letting this primal self die, I'm simply selecting out the doubt from my being. The most important thing you can select out at the higher levels of your divine plan is this, what we might call an existential doubt in your right to be here. My beloved, one of the more common patterns created by the fallen beings, and one that this messenger has not realized consciously until I am giving this teaching, is to make you think that because you have done or said something here on earth in the situation that caused your birth trauma that was not perfect, then you don't have the right to challenge the fallen beings. In other words, you think you should be perfect. And if you are not perfect, then you should not challenge them. Many of you can recognize this. This messenger had an interesting experience driving to this conference, where he, in conversation, without any forethought, said, you know, I've actually never discovered anything evil in my own being. And then he paused because he was shocked by the statement, because he had never thought about it before. But the fact of the matter is that with all of his willingness to observe himself, to go into his psychology, he has never discovered an element of evil in his being. And the same will hold true for most of you and most of the people who will read this teaching. The same holds true, my beloved, for every avatar. There is no evil in your being. There never was. And even with all the traumas you have experienced on this planet, you have not allowed an element of evil into your being. And therefore, my beloved, what does this mean? Well, it means You are not a fallen being. You are not like the fallen beings. And therefore, even though you may not be perfect according to some worldly standard, you have the right to challenge